My name is Nathaniel Haywood, and this is my chapter presentation for Communications 622. I will be presenting to you all Chapter 11, which is entitled Traditional Leadership Approaches. In this presentation, I will break down the following. I will first define leadership. I will follow that with a comparison between leadership and management. Next will be 3 traditional approaches to leadership, followed with 2 leadership theories. And of course, I will conclude with a question for you all. So if you will open up our slides, we can begin. The first slide defines leadership. What is leadership? That's a question that people have been asking seemingly forever. Every textbook we have to read, someone's got a definition for leadership. So for this presentation, we will use the definition of the textbook provided. Leadership is a process and a property, and I will explain the difference between the two. The first part is leadership as a process, the use of non-coercive influence to direct and coordinate the activities of group members to meet a goal. Leadership as a property, however, is the set of characteristics attributed to those who are perceived to use such influence successfully. Essentially, leadership as a process, that's the verb, that's the leading part. Leadership as a property is leadership as a whole. Leadership as a process is directing, coordinating. Leadership as a property, the characteristics and the qualities that make a leader a leader. Of course, since they are both defining the same thing, there's a host of similarities, but the one commonality that stands out the most is influence. And influence is defined by the ability to affect the perceptions, beliefs, attitudes, motivations, and or behaviors of others. On to the next slide, we will begin the comparison between leadership and management. The two are related, but they are not the same. A person can be a manager, a person can be a leader. They can be both, or they can be neither. So, we have a side-by-side comparison. We have 3 set tasks, and below each task, we have a list of how a manager would handle them as opposed to how a leader would handle them. When it comes to creating an agenda, a manager plans and budgets. They establish detailed steps and timetables for achieving needed results. Meanwhile, when it comes to creating an agenda, a leader will establish direction, develop a vision, often for the future, especially the distant future. I compare it to a road trip, if you will. A manager will map out the trip, bathroom stops, we're going to stop here, then we're going to go there. But the leader, they determined the final destination. They determined this is where we're going to go. And the two work in tandem, I believe. When it comes to developing a human network, a manager organizes and staffs, they establish structure, they delegate responsibilities and authorities. However, a leader would align the people, communicate direction through works and deeds. And the difference is the manager puts things in place, right? And the leader gets it all moving. The same goes for executing plans. A manager will control and deal with problem solving, but the leader will motivate and inspire. And one thing that I understood when I read this was that while they're different, a leader can do the things a manager does, and a manager can do the things a leader does, right? When a leader can plan and budget, right? A leader can control situations and deal with problem solvings, but the distinction is that when a leader does that, the leader isn't just leading, he or she is managing. The same goes for a manager. A manager can motivate, they can inspire, they can establish direction. However, when they are doing those, they aren't just managing, they are leading. They both are very important, especially when you want to be an effective leader, but they're not the same thing, and that is important. On to the approaches to leadership, the bulk of this chapter, rather. The first approach is the trait approach. The trait approach identifies stable and enduring character traits that differentiated effective leaders from non-leaders. Essentially, what traits did the good, effective leaders have as opposed to those who aren't leaders? What was the key difference when it came to qualities and traits? Researchers believe that some of the world's most notable leaders throughout history had certain traits that made them stand out. These include Abraham Lincoln, Napoleon, Gandhi, a bunch of other influential people in our history that led. There were certain characteristics that made them different from just regular people. This trait list was once upon a time very lengthy. They included all sorts of things, whether it be personality traits and also physical appearance. Some thought Abraham Lincoln was a great leader because he was tall. I'm 6'3", so I take that however you may. Anyway, Um, these traits were, again, lengthy, but they were recently reduced down to focus more on the person, because that is far more important. Things like motivation, drive, honesty, integrity, charisma, things of that nature. I mean, there are probably some horrible tall leaders out there somewhere. So there's more to it than just the biology of it all. However, they haven't completely written off appearance quite yet, but they do want to focus now more on the person, not necessarily his or her appearance. The next approach is the behavioral. It's a short slide because, quite frankly, the similarities between the first approach and this approach are extremely similar. All you need to do is remove trait and insert behavior, and you have the behavioral approach. It essentially argues that there's certain behaviors that effective and good leaders have that others do not. Similar concepts to the trait approach. Replace traits with behaviors. The next approach is the Victor Vroom decision tree approach. This is a little bit more detailed than the previous two. It more so deals with how to determine subordinate involvement when it comes to decision making. It assumes that, certain leaders display different leadership styles, and essentially it prescribes how much participation subordinates should be allowed when it comes to making important decisions. This approach uses multiple factors to determine that level of involvement, and it asks the leader to assess 9 key variables, and depending on how important each one is, that should indicate how much involvement a subordinate or follower or group member should have. These include decision significance, importance of commitment, leader expertise, likelihood of commitment, group support, group experience, and of course team competence. So that's kind of the branches of the tree, if you will. And once you determine those, you can accurately and effectively determine how much involvement a subordinate should have when it comes to making important group decisions. On to the theory part of this presentation, we have two theories, the LPC theory and the path goal theory. The LPC essentially is the least preferred coworker, found on page 421. It's a scale presumed to measure a leader's motivation. The theory claims that a leader's effectiveness depends on the situation, developed by Fred Fiedler, essentially. What does a leader do in these certain moments? And that kind of determines how effective he or she may be when it comes to a certain situation, a certain scenario. How do they handle it? What do they do? I'm sure we've all seen some leaders handle tough situations as perfectly as they could, and I'm sure you and I have seen some leaders blow it. And this theory claims that the effectiveness depends on the situation. So follow this with the path goal theory, a very common theory. I think I've seen it in every textbook I've had in grad school, so you get a pretty good understanding of it. But it's very simple, and it makes sense, quite frankly. This theory claims that effective leaders clarify the paths or behaviors that will lead to desired rewards or goals. Essentially, if you want to make sure your group is motivated, make the path to the goals that they've established for themselves, that they want, make that path clear for them. Make it clear that certain behaviors can help them get to where they want to be. Subordinates are motivated by their leader to the extent that the behaviors of the leader influence their expectations. Behavior is very important when it comes to motivation and when it comes to leading. And that's what this theory is claiming. Well, thank you. I have one last question for you all, and then I would love to see what you all have to say. Thank you for sticking around with me. I hope I didn't bore you too much. The final question is, how important is it for effective leaders to also be effective managers? Can a leader be effective if it cannot manage? Essentially, does a leader need to be a great manager, or should a leader primarily focus on leadership? I would love to see what you all have to say. Thank you so much for sticking around with me. I hope you all have a wonderful end to your semester. Thank you.